So as you'll all be able to tell, your mics and your cameras are switched off for this session, but you can use the chat function that lots of you are already using. If you make sure next to 2, if you select everyone from the drop-down menu, that means that all of your colleagues who are attending this as well will also be able to see your messages. If you have specific questions, if you can please put those in the Q&A box. That's an option at the bottom of your screen. Just put questions in at any point throughout the webinar, and we'll be pausing at certain points to come to those questions. So don't worry if we don't come to you straight away, we will answer everybody throughout the webinar. So today and then at the end we'll have a survey. So when this closes, there'll be a survey with an opportunity to offer some feedback. We'd really appreciate you taking some time to do that, so we can help shape these webinars and make them as useful as possible for you going forwards. And as I said, the recording and the documents will be available after this for you all as well. So now if we'll just come on to the objectives of the presentation today. So today, as you'll all know, we'll be talking about rider characteristics. And first of all, we're going to be clear about why we are collecting those rider characteristics. And Emily, our Executive Director, is going to go through that all for you in a moment. We want you to really understand the benefits of it. And again, Emily will be going through that. But we've also got Jane and Becky here with us, who are grant recipients from different parts of the country. And they will be going through how it's worked for them in their areas. We also want to be clear about the changes that have been made. As you'll have seen from some of the comms that have been sent out, we have adapted what we're asking for in terms of rider characteristics based on feedback that you in the industry have made. So we'll be running through those changes that we've made today and why we have done them. And then hopefully by the end of the session, you will understand how to collect the information required, and also what support we have worked on in order to make it as easy as possible for you. So now I'll hand over to Emily, our Executive Director, who's going to run through why we are collecting rider characteristics.
Great, thanks Jess, thanks for a good introduction, and welcome to everyone who's on the call today, and for those of you who are listening afterwards as well. It's really appreciated that you're taking the time and going on this journey with us in collecting rider characteristics. And the first thing that I always really want to say and consistently make sure that we say is that we're really deeply grateful for everything that you do, whether you're a grant recipient, you're a training provider, you're an instructor, you're just a great supporter of Bikeability. We are always deeply grateful for everything that you do to make sure that all children can access cycle training. We know it's been an incredibly difficult, tumultuous couple of years now with COVID conditions and the changes that we're all having to kind of seek and to make to Bikeability as we react to changing conditions around us. But we know that the industry is absolutely so deeply committed to making sure that every child can access cycling, and we're so grateful for everything that you do. So please always know that the Trust is fighting we do often fight for resources and things for the industry to make sure that you've got what you need to be able to demonstrate that we're reaching and able to get to every child. So it's a really important conversation that we're launching today and having with you, but it's with our deep and gratitude and thanks as always. So I also want to just sort of almost say a bit of an apology that it's taken us a bit of time to get these resources and the great practice guidance that we'll be launching today and things out to you so that you can collect this effectively. I'm sorry we've had to shift timescales as well. This has not been easy conversations to have across the last year that we've been looking at rider characteristics and bringing it in, and it's taken a lot of time to get here. It's involved a lot of legal discussions. There are so many lawyers, data protection experts have been involved in this, in the development of the resources that we're launching today to get them signed off, and also Department for Transport have had to significantly shift their expectations in line with things that are being asked of them at a central level as well. So it's taken us a while to get here, but we are here, and we're really delighted that we're here, because this is something that we at the Trust and all of the central staff team feel really passionately about, because we desperately want to make sure that Bikeability training is able to reach every single child, and that's why, and fundamentally why, we want to collect rider characteristics. So Lucy, if you go on to the next into the bullet points for me, that would be super helpful. So in terms of why we're collecting this, so it is actually a DFT requirement. It has been in the grant terms and conditions and the original bidding of money for grants since 2016. So it's been something that we've been long wanting to bring in and seeking to bring in for a significant period of time. So it is a requirement of grant terms and conditions to be able to collect rider characteristics. The second one is the one that keeps me awake at night. Right now we are absolutely building the business case, so the significant investment that we want to make to be able to reach every child by 2025, which, as you know, is the Prime Minister's ambition through the gear change document. And we are currently in active negotiation with Treasury and with Department for Transport on the business case. But I'm in a weakened position because I'm obviously being held to account and being asked for information about how we're reaching every child, what children are we not reaching. And at the moment, we haven't got the evidence. We've not got the evidence base to really show and share the great work that's already out there and being done to reach every child, but also to give Treasury and Department for Transport the assurance that we are doing everything we could or should be doing to tackle access to bikeability. And I don't like being in a weakened position when I'm trying to secure, revenue funding and security in future for bikeability. So we've got to move on this so that we're not in a weakened position for the future. It's really hard to secure revenue funding. It's the thing that and those of you who are grant recipients will know how much Treasury do not like revenue funded streams that they prefer kind of capital and things. So we've got to give them the confidence that we are doing everything that we need to do, and that's why it's just so supremely important for us. The third point is that we know we've got a legitimate basis for collecting this for this data. There are two really important pieces of legislation. The first being the public sector equality duty. So all public sector organisations, including the schools where the majority of our training takes place, have this duty on them to be able to provide information to ensure that public money is being spent and there are not access to barriers for people to be able to take up this. So we do have the duty there. It's also very much part of already the data that's collected by Department for Education and by schools in order to be able to get DFE funding and through the pupil census that happens. So really important duty, and it's already happening at a schools level. And then we also know under GDPR, and it's particularly Article 9, that we have this basis, and we've got a full data protection impact assessment that has been designed, drafted and developed by experts at Department for Transport and Bikeability Trust from a legal and data protection perspective. So we've got all the documentation in place, we've got the right privacy statements on the Trust website, and very soon gov.uk will have its own privacy statement specific to bikeability training, which just underpins the legitimate basis and how this is being collected. So we've got all of the legal stuff in place as well. And then I think finally, and this is just such important for us, we're all committed and we all want to make sure that every single child can access bikeability, that it's safe, that it's accessible and it's inclusive. And by collecting rider characteristics, it will help us to do this, because it will help us to put in targeted investment and targeted initiatives to make sure that we can do this work. Now, I think probably the most common complaint that we get into the trust from parents is that their child, particularly on the basis of special educational needs and disabilities or an accessibility issue, was not provided with, in their words, the right form of support to take on bikeability. So if we've got all these systems in place and we're asking for the data in advance, then we will be able to provide much more inclusive and accessible bikeability. So it really helps us on the delivery perspective as well, which is great. So that's why we're collecting rider characteristics. But we also think that there's also benefits to yourselves as well as grant recipients and training providers. I know from the conversations that I've had with many people over the last 12 months or so that you also need this information to help secure planning and funding. It's not just about getting the bikeability funding, but this also helps with wider road safety initiatives, with wider active travel initiatives, and obviously with further rounds of funding coming up in the future. Having access to this data is going to support your strategic and operational and business cases for future funding in your area. So it is a really vital and important piece of the jigsaw. we all want to give assurances about how we're reaching every child. You know, currently we can only give high-level national statistics, which say that we're reaching about 44% of children by the time they leave year 6 in primary school, that they've had some form of bikeability. But getting this data and being able to drill down into it will give us much better confidence of where we've got the coverage, which children we are able to access and able to offer bikeability to, and then really crucially how we can target with additional funding, or like a widening participation fund that we've just launched, or our SEND funding that we launched last year, so that you're really able to reach every child in your area. So it's just continuing to build that case for you as a grant recipient and training provider as well. And we really do want this to be about demonstrating our impact. Now, I would love much more in our annual review, in the data that I'm able to talk confidently to Department for Transport about, is to be able to demonstrate how you are already doing such phenomenal work in your area in reaching every child, and some of the great and inclusive bikeability sessions that I know that are out there and that are happening, but we can demonstrate much more effectively when we can see that impact, and that we can give that kind of confidence that we've got the coverage and we're getting to every child. So I really do think, and I genuinely believe, there's lots of benefits for you as a grant recipient and a training provider as well in being able to collect this data, so that we can truly say we've built the case to offer bikeability for every child and realise the PM's ambition by 2025. So really delighted that you're here, you're coming on this journey with us, and that we can have a greater confidence in the data that we hold centrally. So really delighted that you're spending the time with us today. So that's, I think, it in terms of what I was saying. So I think, is it an opportunity to ask any questions now before we hear from the team?
Yep, we haven't got any questions in the chat at the moment, but now is your chance if you have anything specifically for Emily. We will be going on to the case studies and then the documentation later. So if you haven't got any questions yet, that's fine. There'll be further opportunities going down. Peter, I can see that you're raising your hand. If you can use the chat or the Q&A, then that would be really valuable, please. And just give everyone a few moments to type any questions that they might have. But as I say, we'll be coming to some Q&A points later as well. So if there's no questions yet, that's not a problem. You'll have plenty of opportunity later on.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks for that, Emily. It's really helpful. I just wanted to say hello to everyone. I'm the new girl in town. So my name's Lucy Rennick. I'm the new business industry manager. And my role is to support industry to recover and scale up to meet the challenge. I've spoken to some of you about your opportunities and challenges, and I've really valued that. It's been really helpful. And I'm really keen to talk to others. So if I haven't spoken to anyone, please get in touch, and I'm looking forward to supporting you. But the most important thing for me about this webinar today is that we're now going to hear from two amazing speakers. And just mentioned about the Q&A. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk to our two amazing speakers, or hear from our two amazing speakers, and then if you can keep putting your questions in the Q&A. Jess is our Q&A monitor, our question monitor, so she'll keep an eye on the questions for us, and we'll have a really good session with our speakers together. But without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Jane Dealey from Wiltshire, with her lovely Wiltshire Stonehenge and rainbow background. So Jane is going to talk to us about their experiences of collecting rider characteristics. Over to you, Jane. And thank you.
Good morning. It was either Stonehenge or the view of my living room, so I chose Stonehenge this morning. Good morning. I feel a little bit of a fraud with this, because to us this was bread and butter. I'm going to give you a little bit of information about the context in Wiltshire and how we've worked it, but I don't think there's anything brilliant. So being called an amazing speaker is really flattering, but I think this is bread and butter, so we'll see how it goes. I will just try and see if I can get the screen up. Hoping I can get the right screen. Okay, I think we're there. In Wiltshire, when the requirement to report, the characteristics came out, we were a little bit stunned, and it came out around the same sort of time as there was a lot of issues around GDPR. In Wiltshire, all our instructors are self-employed contractors, and we took the decision at the time that they wouldn't then handle any personal information. At one of the Bikeability conferences, we were in a workshop and spoke to some people who gave us some good tips on consent forms, and we now keep consent forms in the school office. Schools request our training through a traded services portal in Wiltshire. All the Wiltshire Council services that sell to schools are involved in that, and we ask schools to request Bikeability and some of our other programs through that portal. And we then take those requests and pop them out to our area teams. We're a very big geographic county, so all the school bookings are done by our instructor teams on a local basis rather than us doing that centrally. Once they've made the booking, the lead instructor will send us a course registration form saying roughly how many children they're expecting, no details at that point, and those are adapted as we go on. We've got a little bit of an issue with cancellations at the moment, but we get a course registration form in. And as I said, the consent form itself stays in the school office, and the instructor will go and check that and make note of any of the details that they need to know for the training. We are encouraging our schools to let us know SEND and other needs in advance, but as I'm sure most of my colleagues across the country will appreciate, that doesn't always happen. So that's something that we're working on over the coming year. Once the training has happened, the instructors submit a completion form to us, and that also acts as their invoice for payment. Once we get that form into our central office, we go back through, and we actually in Wiltshire charge a small top-up fee through the traded services system. The data that we collect, once we've got that completion form in, our admin officer emails the school contact that we've got on the records with requests for various bits and pieces. And one of those things is a form with the rider characteristics on, and we also send out links to our school, our parent carer and our rider surveys. We decided that this was the easiest way for us to manage this, that nothing of this would happen at the instructor end, that we would do it after the course had finished. We knew the children, we send a list of the children back to the school. These are the children on this course, please send the details back. We remind them that monitoring is a requirement, and our admin officer will chase the non-returns. He's been very good at that. We actually haven't had to chase many. Over the last year, we've actually had one refusal, and I was a little bit mystified because the quote came back that the ethnicity information wasn't provided because they didn't have it for all the participants. We decided, given the year we've had, that this was for 6 children, and that we would cope without going back and chasing that. It was towards the end of term and everybody was a little bit frantic by that point. In terms of form, the form that we use will be quite familiar. Lucy will make no bones about it. I've stuck a to be updated watermark across it at the moment. That's the form that we've been using over the last year. It goes out, we stick the numbers on the top, we give the school a list of the names as said in the email, and we encourage them to send it back. Despite putting an example on it, they still manage to fill some of the boxes out wrong, but we manage to cope with that. And the email that goes with it does include text, just reminding them why we're asking. We'll probably tweak that a little bit after today with some of the updated information, but very much reminding the schools that this is group basis, this isn't individual basis. That basically is my experience. We haven't had a problem. It took us a little bit of thought at the beginning to get this underway, to work out how it was going to work for the way that we book and run our courses. But touch wood, over the last year, that's been running quite smoothly, and we're looking forward to it just carrying on in the coming year. That was it. Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah, no, that not just it. That's perfect. That's really good. That's just what we wanted to hear, Jane, which is your experience, which is although it was a bit of a knobbly issue at first, you've just come
Yeah.
up with a solution and it works for you, which is absolutely great. And I know that everyone will appreciate that. And coming up later, no spoilers, we've nicked Jane's form to support the industry. And our thanks, Jane, not only for you being here, but for the fact that you're happy to share your best practice with industry as our next speaker is. So thanks for that, Jane.
I'm always happy to share. I always share back. I like to share other people's work too. So
and I think that's something that we all, the industry does, and we need to do more of, because that's what I'm getting from talking to people, is that everyone's happy to share, because we've all got the same objective, we all want to do the same, we've all got the same purpose, isn't it? So yes, although I'm the new girl, it's been a real pleasure. Challenges apart, it's still a real pleasure. So it's my great talking about pleasure. It's my great pleasure now to hand you over to Becky Marston from the Active Wellbeing Active Wellbeing Club Society. So over to you, Becky.
Thank you, Lucy. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Right. Right, so can I just get a flag? People can see that now?
Yeah, we've got you.
Fabulous. So thank you for inviting me along today. Hello from not so sunny Dudley this morning. My name is Becky Marston and I work for the Active Wellbeing Society. I'm going to talk to you a bit about our experience of collecting rider characteristics and how we've used that. Some of you will know me. I've been a bikeability instructor for about 10 years now, and I've worked in the active travel sector for about 12 years. My role at the Active Wellbeing Society, I work on new business for them, so selling, the vision of cycling and how more people can get involved in it across the country, and sharing our best practice to make sure more people can access it. And I also proud to sit on the Bikeability Trust Effectiveness Advisory Group, and just learn from all the other providers out there and feed in our experience as well. So the Active Wellbeing Society, or TORS as we shorten it quite often, we're a community benefit society and a cooperative, and we work to build happy, healthy communities that can live active and connected lives. We work to tackle, work with communities in the highest areas of deprivation, and our main goal is to tackle inequality, and we do this through embedded community development. We work with a range of partners, but we also offer services ourselves, including social prescription and active travel interventions like cycle training, and as well as a wide range of sort of physical activity, health, and food provision more recently. We're fortunate enough to have an in-house data and insight directorate, so data is really key for us, and we've got a team of specialists that can help with data capture, analysis and evaluation. Important to say that we were Birmingham City Council around 3 years ago, and we were the wellbeing service for them, but because of competing funding, we actually came out of the council and formed as a community benefit society, and that's enabled us to tap into other areas of funding, but we still fundamentally deliver services on behalf of the city, and bikeability is one of those things that we deliver. So just set the scene a little bit. Like I say, we've got a team of, and they like to call themselves data geeks in-house. We really want to understand our community that we're serving effectively. So in Birmingham, we know we've got a population of 1.3 million people, and we know that 42% of them are from BAME backgrounds. And we are the youngest city in Europe, and that means we've got lots and lots of young people, and 23% we know that we can tap into to access bikeability. A fairly even gender split in the city, but we do have a massive issue with childhood obesity. 77% of our citizens live in multiple deprivation, and health inequalities are really stark in Birmingham. So on one train line from the most affluent station in towards the inner city, within 4 stops, your life expectancy can change within 9 years. You know, that is really stark for us, and that's something that our mission is to address. And we know active travel is a brilliant way of addressing health inequalities. So I know there's always this big question, oh no, I'm going to have to collect more data. But actually, hopefully, I'll turn your opinion around today to say we've been doing this for 5 years now. Initially, we did start collecting it in the same way as Jane did by the schools. But because we were offering much wider physical activity offer, we actually piggybacked on the leisure centre data collection system. And so we collect all data from people, so full addresses, information, it's not anonymised. And we do it via our consent form. And we had that discussion with the schools early on. And when we formed TORS, we started to really use this data in line with our mission to make sure what we were delivering was inclusive. It was at the areas that we wanted to work with, and that we could really tailor our delivery if we weren't quite meeting the city averages to make up our population. The one thing that we do ask by the schools is the free school meal data. And the reasoning for this is we've been delivering summer holiday programmes for the last couple of years with separate funding from Department for Education to provide physical activity and food provision during the summer holidays. And that's for children in receipt of free school meals. And what we found is there's a big sense of pride with parents to not actually want to admit that they are eligible for this. And so we weren't getting families come forward that actually really needed that help. So we made the call that actually it was better for us to ask the school to provide that data so that we got a true reflection of who we were delivering to. And we used that postcode data to really target and focus our area of work in the city based on deprivation. Bike ownership is another big question we asked to make sure actually if we can evidence that a school has no access to bikes, we can apply for other funding to try and address that as well. And the big thing is, oh, but we can't do that. People won't give us that information. And we absolutely thought that at the start. You know, there's always red tape and anti this and anti that. But if you've got your processes in place, you follow your GDPR, actually it is a relatively straightforward system. It's just winning hearts and minds and bringing them around to why it's so important that we do this. There's perception of worries of personal intrusion and people won't give us this. And we didn't find that at all when we started doing this. Schools and in fact parents are quite, you know, this is a common thing that's asked these days. It's on most forms that you fill in for everything. So to ask this now, it's just part and parcel of the kind of information that people need to collect. We invested heavily in the training of our staff to explain why it was really important for us to have this data. And that if they wanted to access this free provision and for us to make that case for this to be free going forward and to get additional funding for it, we needed to evidence that we were actually able to deliver an equitable service. And we all have a responsibility to follow the Equalities Act. And without collecting this, can we say that actually we are offering an inclusive service? What parents were more worried about was giving us their email address because they didn't want to be bombarded with a load of marketing. And of course, they all have within the privacy policy the right to request that information be removed at any time. As long as we say, look, you're just giving up this for us to evaluate, we're not going to be bombarding you with anything. And actually, most of them are fine with that. And the schools have been really helpful. As long as we, you know, talk to them and discuss the real importance of it, they've been really supportive of this. And so people say, well, why do we need this data? Why are we collecting this? What are we going to do with it? And, you know, for a couple of years, we didn't do much with it. It's only the last 3 years becoming the Active Wellbeing Society that we've really used it. Aside from the fact of it being a grant condition, which a lot of funders in every sector would say these days, it's about ensuring that we're offering an equitable and access to this training. Every child should be able to access this. And, you know, we're probably all in the past guilty of putting our head in the sand a little bit and going to those schools that will regularly give us all those numbers through. We know that the kids have, you know, high quality bikes that we're not going to have any problems with. And that's important because it's got to be for everyone. But actually, we need to understand what the barriers are and why everyone's not able to access this. By doing this, we can remove any unconscious bias. You know, instructors have their favourite schools that they want to work in, but actually, is that the right thing to do, or should it be everyone gets a fair crack of the whip? And we've been able to use this data to leverage additional funding. So, for example, in a high area deprivation, children had no access to bikes. We've been able to use that to make the case, and we've been able to provide free bikes at the end of bikeability provision for those children that didn't have access. So again, we're looking at what is the next step and how can we really ensure that these children have got the ability to be able to ride to school and continue that into later life. And this is gold dust for tenders. So if you're going for another bikeability scheme, if you're renewing, if you're going for other funding pots, so, you know, we've got funders such as Sport England, we go for climate money, health, economic region. We use all of this to evidence the fact that actually we can say we're reaching the hard to reach. And it's because we're understanding the data and we're doing something about it. So how we use our data, just a little example, the last 10,000 bikeability places we delivered across Birmingham. We know that 66% were from BAME communities. Our gender split was even, and we've worked really hard to make sure we're delivering to the most deprived areas in the city. We use this data to map and to target the schools we want to reach. And we monitor this data each month in a dashboard, and then year on year we look at the changes. If we see any anomalies in it, from year to year or month to month, then we'll drill down and we'll go and talk to the school and the parents and try and find out why we aren't reaching and how we need to tailor the service to do that. So, for example, there's a couple of schools with a high proportion of Muslim students, and what the parents said to us, actually, we'd prefer it if we had female instructors. So this picture here is a group of ladies taking part in cycle instructor training course. So we advertised a women's only in course, and we've offered additional support to help them train and to feed them into our bikeability system. And that's really important to us, that these young people have got role models that look like them, that they can aspire to. You know, we have a team of female instructors that ride in hijabs, and it's about normalising cycling for people in those communities. So the young girls that get taught by our instructors now, they've got someone to look up to. They've made a career out of riding their bike, and it's not just about using their bike from riding to A to B. They've actually made a living out of it, and that inspiration is really important to encourage them to take part and really embed it in their culture as well. And understanding the lived experiences of these families and what their barriers are, and building the what next for those communities. So we're fortunate in Birmingham to work closely with Cycling UK, and we've got 22 community cycle clubs across the city, and we try and work really closely with them. We've trained some of them up as bikeability instructors, so we pay them to come and work in their local schools, so that they can support those families at the end of that training period. If they don't have access to bikes, they can borrow them through the club, they can tap into additional training, and then they can join the lead rides as well. So there's something for everyone, so that we're addressing all of those barriers of participation. Just a couple of examples now. Our first picture is an example of Lee Forest Primary School in Stetchford in the north of Birmingham. And when we first started delivering here, we were delivering to proportionately more boys than girls, and there was more white children taking part, and it wasn't representative of the communities that lived in that ward. So we set about trying to change that and understand why that was. We did some intensive work with the school to try and address those barriers. We sent in more female instructors, and we addressed some of those concerns around the cultural sensitivities. And over the period of the last 2 years, we've been able to encourage more and more students to take part. And we've also been able to send more instructors in to provide Learn to Ride, because what we realised is a lot of the students had SEN needs, and actually by programming it over a couple of years, we were able to do the Learn to Ride and then take them through the years along that journey. So, you know, we're now up to 50% BAME participation and an equal split in gender as well. So we've got that, used that data, we've actually turned that around. And this school are massive advocates now. This was their own picture posted on Facebook after we delivered the last level 2 course. They've done a school assembly, and they've had the instructors in to talk to the kids at assemblies. They've tapped into the additional Dr. Bike funding through Cycling UK, and they're real advocates for it now. We regularly get hundreds of children through this school now, and they've been so impressed with the quality of the delivery, they're rolling it out to the rest of their academy sites as well. Our second example is our SEN provision. As a provider, schools were saying to us more children would take part, but they need adapted bikes. It's not something we are able to facilitate, but that didn't stop us. We're like, that's not okay. What we'll do is in the summer holidays, we'll partner with Cycling Projects and Midland Mencap, and who have access to bikes, and will partner and provide holiday courses. And what was really important for us was that this was an inclusive session for the whole family. It wasn't just an SEN provision. A lot of the parents said to us this is the first time they've been able to take part in something that was free and affordable, and that the whole family could take part in, rather than it just being separate sessions. So that was a way around us being able to make that provision. And the latest two pictures are hot off the press. These are our summer holiday courses. And we put them on in places where the uptake in schools is lower, or the schools aren't signed up, so that we can ensure that those children have got an opportunity to take part. And we provide bikes for this training so that their access to a bike isn't an issue. And we also piggyback on other funding opportunities. So not only did these children get to take part in Bikeability, it was part of our holidays and feeding initiative over the summer, so that they also got to take part in a range of physical activity interventions, and they were fed as well during the week. So they've had a brilliant summer in the parks, not only learned how to ride bikes, but they've also been fed and had lots of fun as a family as well. So really proud. Just a couple of examples of how we've used our data and sort of responded and added additional benefit to make sure we're creating cyclists for life out the back of that. That's it from me. Just a massive thank you for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'll attempt to stop sharing as well.
Becky, that was absolutely amazing. And I think actually, rather than me say how amazing it was, in the chat, Sam Cartledge posted amazing, what a wide reach your provision has. So yeah, I'm just going to sort of echo that, but that was just really interesting. And also the leveraging extra funding was really useful in terms of using that data, but both amazing. So massive thank you, Becky. Massive thank you, Jane. I know there's been some questions in the chat. I've been focused on listening to the presentation. So Jess, have we got some juicy questions for Becky and Jane?
Yeah, absolutely. We have got some questions that we'll come to later. So if I don't read out your question, we will come to it at a later point that's just a little bit more relevant. But we do have some questions for Becky and Jane, which is fantastic. First one we've got from Mandy Bailey saying, do you find that schools feel more reassured, Jane, sending the data directly to you rather than going via training providers?
I didn't make it clear at the beginning, we are actually our own training provider. We are both the grant recipient and the training provider, and we contract the instructors directly to deliver our programme. But I think, yes, I think the fact that they are sending that data to Wiltshire Council rather than to Fred Smith, their instructor, I think it is reassuring. We know we have that weight of the council behind us, so it does make a big difference. And that was one of the decisions. I mean, apart from the whole GDPR angle, it was part of that confidence that we're all part of the same thing. They're requesting it from Wiltshire Council. They know it's Wiltshire Council delivering it, and they know that's where they're sending their data, and they know that we've got all those policies in place to protect the data.
Great, thank you. And another question, well, more of a comment really, based on your model as well, saying that in this anonymous person's area, they don't take away the names of any child. This remains with the school, and we work with anonymous numbers, and they find that works really well. And also I've made the point that it works well if linked with road safety.
Yeah, I did have a question actually. It might be one for Emily. We've had big discussions about children's names. We collect them and keep them so that we can prove, if ever audited, that we have delivered training to individual children. If you want to come and count how many children we have actually delivered, we can prove those individual children at that individual school exist. But do we need to be collecting names and keeping those names is the question, or are you happy that
purely from our purposes and what we've agreed as part of this exercise and in lengthy discussions with DFT is that we're only looking for the anonymous data, so we do not need auditable data on individual children's names and records that never would need to be needed to share with the Trust and Department for Education. What we'll look at is numbers of people on roll against the numbers that have been delivered to, so we can see that aggregate figure, but it will be on a numbers basis, not on an individual child basis.
we obviously do need to keep those children's names at the moment, because that's what we send back to the school to say, send us the characteristic data for these children. So we'll have to explore that a bit longer.
It needs to be part of your own data protection procedures and policies about how you retain, and obviously retain for the right amount of time and protect that data, but that will be as part of your wider council's policies, won't it?
Yeah, thanks.
Great, thank you. So we've got one more question for Jane, but it may also apply to Becky, asking about using a platform for bookings. So Joe from Gloucester is particularly keen to hear from anybody who might be using Clarity Cycle Ready. I don't know if that applies to either of you or anyone who is attending today.
We've been approached, Joe, but at the moment, because we've got our traded services platform that the schools request training for, we don't do our bookings centrally. The schools are allocated out to individual instructors or area teams, and they do the bookings. It isn't something that we feel we need at the moment. We've looked at it, but I don't think it justifies the expense of a whole new system and breaking what we've already got. What we've got is working for us at the moment. And I think we'll tick along. I don't know if anybody else has got any feedback on it.
Can I jump in from a national perspective in terms of so this is definitely an area of development, so the digitization and to have a consistent booking system that exists across all areas would be something that we have as a dream at the trust, both to make everyone's lives easier and because we recognize, as James just said there is quite extraordinary costs to some of the systems that are out there that have been designed. Great systems, Clarity is a great system, but it is out of the reach of many organizations in being able to embed that. It's something that longer term I'd love to say the trust would be able to support with central cost funding, but we've yet to win the case with DFT. I'll keep making it and I won't let it go, but we will keep making the case that that should be part of the overall bikeability settlement. But I honestly think I'm not going to win that argument with them at the moment currently, but we will keep making it.
Thanks, Emily. And yeah, that relates to David's point, asking about electronic gathering of data and how that might work in the future. You've just covered that there, so that's fantastic. And so other than that, I think we are okay in terms of questions. We will come to them later, so if your question hasn't been answered yet, we will come to it later. Emily, you've asked if Jane will share your monitoring form with us. Well, now's the perfect time to hand over to Joanne, because as Lucy mentioned earlier, we have adapted Jane's form for a model form from the trust, and Joanne's going to run through all of that side of things now for you all.
Okay, thanks, Jess. Lucy, if you could bring up the slide, that would be great. Thank you.
Let me just get to the right space. Right. Right. Are we on? Have you got it?
Yeah. Lovely. Thank you. Okay. So in terms of the procedure, so what is going to be changing? We're going to go live on the date, which is anticipated to be the 1st of November. We anticipate it because we know that things change, but we will say that it won't be any earlier than the 1st of November. So that's when we need to look at trying to put some of these changes and procedures in place. And on the go live date, there will be a requirement on Link when recording your delivery to input rider characteristics. I'll come on to Link and what it looks like at the moment and what we can anticipate will change for that. So we'll come on to that later, but that's what is going to be changing in terms of Link. So Link will detail additional categories. So at the moment we're asking for certain categories to be recorded, particularly for ethnicity. This will change quite significantly and it will bring us in line with the data required for ONS. And you will see these on the model forms that will be available with the packs, and I think they are live on the website as we speak as well. And there will also be a prefer not to say option. This gives us the opportunity to keep the funding in place for schools and parents that do not wish to give us that information. Okay. So in terms of collecting the rider characteristics, you've really got two options. So the first option is to ask the school to report anonymously. This is what Jane is doing in her model, and it's kind of recommended in some ways because it's easier as the school already collects this data, so it's quite a streamlined process. So we can either do this with the instructor on the day, or an email can be sent to the school at a later time just to ask for that information. And the second option is to ask for the parents to report individual rider characteristics through their consent forms. This would need to be separated from the consent form, and this is probably the option that you'd need to do for non-school-based courses as well. And again, you'll see in the model consent forms that we've got, you've got the consent forms for the parents, and on the back page you have got the rider characteristics, so they can easily be separated. Okay, so just a few notes on the information. The data we want to be collected is on the attended figures and not on the booked figures. What we want is a true indication of the rider characteristics of the children that are actually attending the course. So if you've got 12 people booked on the course and 10 people that have actually attended, we want the figures on the attended, the 10 that have actually attended. Okay. Completing true information, it's important to collect and report accurate data. So incorrect data is worse than having no data at all. So just to make sure that all your records are as complete as they can be and as true as they can be as well. If you're already collecting the data for rider characteristics, please don't stop and wait for the go live date. Thank you for doing it so far, and you've probably already started to see the benefits as Becky has. It's important, though, to start to note the changes that in what we're asking for in line with the ONS. So just to make sure that you're familiar with what is going to be moving to. And we also recommend that you start looking at this and changing your forms and your processes as soon as possible. And what we're asking for on the new characteristics, if you wish to input that on link before the go live date, it can be transferred over. But what we don't want you to do is to move to the go live date and have old data that you can't put onto link. So if you can look at changing your forms and processes sooner rather than later, everything will be in place by the go live date. Okay, so opting out as a grant recipient. Obviously, the prefer not to say option does give grant recipients the option to opt out. However, if you've heard the benefits today and the opportunities that are available for collecting the data, and it is essential, as Emily said earlier, for the future of bikeability and to be able to offer training to all of the children that we do collect this data. So it is so vital, and I hope that's come across today. And so opting out, it is an option technically, but longer term, it is something that we need to get our heads around and to actually start doing that. And I hope that we are able to help you to do this. Okay, so this is link at the moment. So those that are grant recipients will be very familiar with this. This is what we ask for at the moment when we are inputting data. So you'll see there the year group, the total booked and total attended. As far as link goes at the moment, that is all we need. And some of you may complete some of the rider breakdown. We have some people that just do gender, just do free school meals eligible. But as of the go live date, everything on the rider characteristics will be essential that is completed. So what you will see is, if I just take gender, for example, this will change and you'll have male, female, other, and then there will be a prefer not to say option. So everything that, all the numbers that are in there should add up to the total attended figure. And the link will ask you to make sure that this is correct, and it won't let you input it unless it totals that. The ethnicity, obviously that's quite a compact group. This will be expanded to be in line with ONS, which you will see on the model forms. And again, there will be a prefer not to say option there as well. So it's again, all of the figures will add up to the total attended. Okay, and I think that's it from me. So I'll hand you back over to Lucy. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Joanne. That's really helpful. We'll any questions for Joanne, bung them in the Q&A, and we will we'll look at them in a tick when I can get to the next page. So yeah, so we've created some supportive documents. Now, I know that an awful lot from my talk, talking to a lot of you, there's some really good documentation that you guys have got anyway. So we've only created these as an aid memoir or to support you if you want them. And obviously it has that additional information, which is extended ethnicity characteristics in line with ONS and the preferred not to say option. But we've created a rider characteristics collection form that's anonymised, aka Wiltshire's. So Jane has very kindly given us, let us use that form to share with industry, which we have, and it's basically exactly the same, but just it incorporates all that data. We've then got a parental consent form with rider characteristics that goes directly to parents, aka Becky's form, which they've used very successfully, and it's exactly the same, but it just incorporates that additional information in terms of ethnicity and the prefer not to say. We've got a model consent form to go with the anonymised form. Now, actually, if you guys have your own consent form, so you probably won't need to change them, but we just wanted a holistic package. So if you're using that data, you'd want a consent form that didn't have the rider characteristics. We also have created a letter to schools that Emily has signed, which is basically reinforcing the message of the importance of collecting the data and the legitimate basis to do that. And we've also created an infographic, well, we being Jess, but basically some colleagues said, actually, schools won't read the letter. Have we got anything simpler to reinforce it? So we've created an infographic that hopefully, if you wave under the noses of our busy colleagues in education, that it will kind of reinforce the message in a simpler way. We've got some FAQs, which hopefully will be a really good reference point and answer any questions and queries. But if there are any outstanding stuff, then get in contact with the trust and talk to us about what your issues are and anything we can do to support you. So we will email these documents out next week to you for those who've attended. They're on live. Jess put them online this morning, so they're on the website. And this webinar will also, the link for this will also be sent round for people to reference when Jess is back from holiday. So just let me stop sharing so we don't have to look at that. So any more questions, Jess? Any more questions? Well, I'd like to say for me and Joanne, but I'd rather Joanne really. But any questions about about the supporting document or the process? And then if not, should we just address the wider questions that have come up?
Absolutely. So yes, Melissa, you asked at the start, when will consent letters be available to use or tweak? So as Lucy's just said, they are online now. The link to those will be provided in the follow-up email that you get after this webinar, and we'll also be emailing it out this week, early next week. You can also just go onto the professionals website now, and under documents, there is a new rider characteristics section where all of those documents are available to download. So going on to the other kind of more general questions, we've got a couple of questions about funding. So both Jessica and David have asked if the school prefer not to say, is that going to impact on funding from the Bikeability Trust? Now, this is one of the changes that we have made in response to feedback.
I'm assuming you want me to answer that one, Jess. So dive straight in. Yes, so we did make this this change, and we can still provide bikeability funding on the basis of schools preferring or opting out from rider characteristics. Although obviously, as Jess, Lucy, and Joanne have really clearly explained, we're giving a whole suite of information to schools to help them to understand how this is both their public sector. They're also obligated under the public sector equality duty to provide this information. They're actually already providing this information to government. They have to as part of the pupil census data. It's how DFE funding is configured. So they're already providing everything that we're asking for already to government. So there isn't any particular difference here. So that's why we're putting in the systems for doing it, but we won't withhold funding.
Thanks, Emily. We've got another question here. Perhaps Becky, with your experience, you might be able to pull out an example for this, saying we're collecting data on SEN, BAME, etc. Then the data is on those who've taken part, not those we have missed. Doesn't this defeat the object a little bit? Your examples kind of have slightly covered this, but have you got any further points to make?
I guess it's for us that when we started really using the data, we looked at the school figures, and then we'd go back the following year and we'd compare the two against each other and say, okay, did anything change on year? If it hasn't, why hasn't that happened? And that would allow us to go back and talk to the school and try and delve into those barriers. We might do some community development work in that area to try and address that a little bit. But it's really, you need to compare the data in year on year per school so you can have a look at your reach. And then across your whole area that you're delivering across. Apologies, I do have children, haven't started school yet till next week. So.
Oh, it's a wonderful sound in the background, Becky. Yeah, I've got a teenager in the background as well, so I know that one. So I just wanted to add one thing here as well, because I think what Becky so beautifully explained, and in her presentation this morning, is just about how it's that important of having that good relationship with your schools and the communities that you're working in. And you will be much better placed as local providers to understanding the communities that you work in and what their needs are, and how you can then address that through bikeability training, and then, as Becky's explained, leveraging in additional funding to be able to tackle those barriers. At a global level, so at an England level, the Trust and DFT will be looking at the data at an aggregate level. We are able to look at pupil characteristic data. We're able to look at data on individual school roles to see how many children accessing pupil premium, SEND figures, all of those are publicly accessible data. They're lagged by a year because obviously they do the school census, then it comes out a year later. But we will be looking and doing some global comparisons as part of the data analysis of bikeability training. So we'll be doing it at a central level, but we'll be encouraging you to do it at a local level.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Emily and Becky. So we've got an interesting question from Vincent here, saying that, you know, too often it's affluent areas that get the bigger slice of bikeability. And he asked whether providers should be financially incentivized to work in more disadvantaged areas. Now, this might be a good moment, Emily, to talk about the Widening Participation Fund that was actually launched this morning.
Yes, so hopefully that's hit people's inboxes already this morning. So Vincent, hi, nice to hear from you, and great question, and great to be able to talk this one through. So we are obviously a little bit concerned that, and I think a couple of people have mentioned it here this morning, we do have a tendency to kind of go back to the same schools and those that will accept bikeability. It also links to other questions that Pete's tabled about making sure that we reach every primary school, and we're targeting into every primary school as well. But we're concerned at the Trust that at the moment we're offering a flat rate fee for all areas, and actually in some areas you might need to operate different ratios. You might need higher levels of funding because you've got higher proportions of children without access to a bikes, you've got higher proportions of children with SEND, or you've got particular issues around inclusivity and access to bikes across all ethnic groups. So we've launched our Widening Participation Fund to again build up the evidence for the future. So this fund is £1 million plus. It's for the first time being offered beyond the existing grant recipient network. So it must be delivered by bikeability instructors, but we're offering as an opportunity to come with some innovative and different ideas about how do you make sure you are reaching every child, and with a focus on those particular groups, so teenage girls, Black and minority ethnic and all ethnic communities, areas of deprivation, and coming up with the ideas of how we can really make sure that we are reaching all of those areas. We're doing that as a round of innovation funding, but my longer term ambition and aim is that generates us the evidence, and then in the future I would love to be able to think that we could have almost like top up kind of additional funding that would mean that you could be permanently addressing those issues in those areas, rather than doing it as kind of when we can release additional funding. But that's again sort of the business case arguments that we need to make over the next few months. But please think of the fund, think of great innovation. I'm so excited that we've launched the fund and that you've got that opportunity. You know, Becky's given you quite a few examples of where they're already innovating in Active Wellbeing Society. So I'm sure she won't mind you stealing a few of those ideas to be able to launch and come back through to innovation.
And yeah, so that email is just getting finalised now, so it'll be in your inboxes by the afternoon. With all of the information and the guidance document. And it goes back to what we're talking about here with rider characteristics. To be able to create a really strong bid, having that data is really essential. So if you've got that evidence base to be able to back up your innovation widening participation fund bids, then that's brilliant. So it all links together really nicely. So going back to the questions now, I've got one question from Jane asking about, are there changes to data collection for adult and family modules? Joanne, can I hand this one to you, please?
Yeah, the family will not change. We don't ask for rider characteristics on the family module, and that will remain the same. For adult, although there's no current funding at the moment, but this may change at some point in the future, we will be asking for gender and ethnicity data, and that will be the expanded version in line with the ONS. There will still be the prefer not to say option. We won't be asking for details on disability.
Thank you, Joanne. And then we've also got a question about, for non-school courses, will pupil premium data be required? You know, based on Becky's point earlier that she made with some parents not wanting to provide that information.
Yeah, it will.
Go on, Jen.
It will be asked on the form, but you know there is that prefer not to say option, but it will be included on the data collection form.
Fantastic, thanks, Joanne. And then we've got one more question about rider characteristics will obviously be very different depending on locality, and whether this data collected will influence future funding criteria. Emily, have you got anything more to say on that?
So the future funding system has not yet been designed for 2022 onwards. That's what we're in the process of negotiating with Department of Transport currently, and details of future funding rounds will be announced as soon as we are able to make that publicly available.
That's great. Thank you, Emily. I'm just looking through some of the other questions. We've got lots coming through, which is really helpful. And if you do have any other questions, please pop them into the Q&A so that we can come to those. We've got one from John Holiday, which is slightly off rider characteristics, but saying that many schools and parents are unaware of training availability. Do you need to contact all primary schools to make them aware of availability? I don't know whether our grant recipients in the room might be able to offer some insight on how they do that.
So yeah, our offer goes out to all schools, but then the follow-up and the chase down is often we target at schools that we know we want to reach that we haven't reached before. And then we're fortunate enough to have quite a large grant, so we have not been in a position to have to turn schools away. As the popularity rises, then normally we don't like to say no to anyone. So if I haven't got the money there, then my vision is then I'll go and find the money from somewhere else. So we might then tap into a part of money from Sport England, or go and speak to our health colleagues and say, look, we've got these children that want to take part and we've run out of money from here. Or we'll go back to the trust and go, look, we've got extra kids and you know they really want to take part. So it's about having a blanket offer, but if you do have the uptake the same old day in, day out, then looking at actually, is that equitable, and prioritising, well, if you had it last year, could you take a break this year to be able to offer to a different school, or could you do it in a community setting that covers a number of schools, so that children that really want to take part could actually access a holiday provision, and that would open it more accessible to more schools in that area if your funding wouldn't go that far. So just thinking outside the box, different approaches, and then making your focus target the areas that you need to build up that participation in, really.
Can I add from a national perspective as well? Thanks, Becky. That was really helpful to hear your insight. So I think there's probably three things I'd say in response to that. The first is we are absolutely wanting to make sure that we can fund every child, but that's a promise by 2025. So we're building up to it. And at the Trust, we're really mindful of capacity, instructor availability, our training provider capacity, and doing that slowly and gradually. And that will be the funding rounds that will increase to 2025 to be able to reach every child. So it's really important that we recognise that. But there's nothing more that Joanne likes than an email from a grant recipient that comes to say they want more money. So we do have a waiting list process for this financial year. We've got capacity on the waiting list. We did have original deadlines for that, but we will still have capacity later on in the year as well. So, you know, if you think you can do more training, if you've got more schools, please come forward, because the Trust does have some capacity in the waiting list. And then the final thing that I wanted to, two other final things, is we are working with DFE. We are balancing demand and availability, but we're about to finalise a new film which will go out via DFE channels direct to schools and to teachers, talking about bikeability, and that's step one, probably step two, possibly, of how we're going to continue to work with DFE and make sure that we're pushing them to really list us properly and sustainably on the curriculum, so that more schools want to take this up, so we can achieve by 2025. And then the final thing is Jessica has been working incredibly hard over the last few months. We're about to launch a new website in the next few coming weeks with a much better journey for how schools, adults and parents can find their local bikeability training course. A much better finder course tool finder that will help them to get in contact with you if someone is interested, and there'll be dedicated journeys for schools, for adults and for children. So we're providing that better shop window, if you like, for bikeability.
Can I add in on a local level? We've found being part of our traded services, our local authority traded services scheme, has been really helpful, and we can use their system for comms direct to schools. We've also attended, they've started with the new virtual world, a series of school business manager network meetings. So they bring in the school office staff, and we've been able to get into that and talk to them about the provision that we offer. We're only reaching about half of our primary schools at the moment because of capacity issues, but also demand. We're covering the demand that we have at the moment, but we know there are a lot of dormant schools. So as we're taking on more instructors, we're saying to them, there is plenty of work for you, because there's an existing demand, but there's also a lot of sleeping schools out there that you can go and knock on the door of and generate more business for yourself, more work. And then I will be knocking on Joe's door to ask for more money at some point as well. So there is a lot that you can do on a local basis, but certainly being part of a corporate local authority system is we found really, really useful, and our colleagues and other services also sort of cross-reference our services and get the word out there, which has been really helpful.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Emily. There's just one question from Sarah, who's joined us from Northern Ireland today, just saying whether they can access the details. I've just put the link to the documents into the chat. These are readily available and publicly available documents. You can download those. And of course, as a registered bikeability training provider, then you can access all of the various support available. So although you're not delivering funded training, we're here to help and support you. And then I just have one more question from Vincent, which is asking for a borough breakdown of our delivery figures. He's interested to see what the split is across England. Is that something we can provide, Emily?
So give us a little bit more time, Vincent. So we're actually working on a new way of being able to share and to show that data. So using all of the previous 3 years financial data, we're going to have a new little tool that will enable us to show that. We will not be making that publicly available until we have shared that with individual grant recipients and worked out, but that's going to take us a little bit of time. So I would expect that probably from the 2022 financial year onwards, we'll have the tool in place to be able to show, so where schools have been mapped and have taken taken part in Bikeability. But yeah, we're on the case. Just give us a little bit more time.
That's wonderful, thank you. So we haven't got any more questions, so if anybody does have any last questions to ask, now is your time to pop them into
Jess, I can see a few in chat.
They've all been copied across to the Q&A, so everything should have been covered.
Okay, I was just seeing one about struggling to recruit instructors and not being able to fulfill demand. So just wanted to issue a reminder. So Philip has just popped that message in there. So we have got the instructor bursaries, which we've allocated now to all grant recipients. And the comms team have been running the first phase of the instructor recruitment campaign, and we'll have a second phase of the instructor recruitment campaign will be coming in the coming weeks as well. So to support grant recipients and training providers to recruit in, and then obviously offer the training bursary so that we can fulfill demand.
Yeah, and we've had over 300 people submit their details that they're interested in accessing that bursary, which is really reassuring. And you'll have had an email from the grants team with those details of those people for you to contact. But Philippa, if you're particularly concerned about your area, please drop me an email. It's jessica@bikeabilitytrust.org. As Emily just said, we're going to be doing some more targeted support for the second phase of the campaign. So if you're an area that is particularly struggling to recruit, we can offer you some marketing and comms advice and support in order to help with that recruitment. And we'll be doing the same with other areas. So if it's something you're particularly concerned about, please get in touch with us, and we'll see how you can help. We can help you further. Great. So we just have one more question from Dillis asking that they're not a grant recipient and how they might be able to access funding. Joanne, can I pass that one over to you, please?
Yeah, it is the case if you're a training provider and you want to access the grant funding, you do need to work with the grant recipients. So it's finding out who the grant recipients are in your area. If you can contact us separately and we can talk you through that, and contacting them and try to work with them and access the funding through them. But we're not looking at taking on additional grant recipients. So it is a case of working with the existing ones.
Then just one question from Greg back on the bursary, and please, in the feedback of the survey that you'll be asked to complete in a minute of the webinar, if a webinar about the instructor bursary would be valuable, please let us know. That's something that we can put together. If it would be useful to spend some dedicated time talking through that campaign. You were only given one place for the bursary funding. We went out to all grant recipients and asked them how many places they needed to fulfill demand, and you were allocated those places based on that. Now, we expect that the world may have changed since that was done, and we may need to revisit that. So we will be looking at that and looking at people who perhaps don't need as many bursary places, and then we can reallocate those much as we do with our normal grant funding. So we will be doing that going forwards. But as I say, if it would be useful to have a separate session about the instructor bursary, that's absolutely something that we can set up. And if any of you have got really great examples of recruitment that's working for you in your area, then it would be really helpful to step forward, get in contact with myself or Lucy, and we'll get you on the panel, much as we have done with Becky and Jane today, to share your expertise, because that's something that we want to do much more, show the great work that's going on across England with all of our grant recipients and training providers.
Okay. And Jessica, can I just add a couple of issues there as well? So I think what I hear more often than not, and I meet and talk regularly with instructors as well as the Independent Workers of Great Britain Cycling Instructors branch, so the union that represents cycling instructors, is that there isn't a lot of cooperation across training providers and grant recipients in their areas. And actually some instructors have lots of capacity to be able to take on more work, but are not asked to work in different areas. Now the trust has set up a Facebook page. I'm starting to see for instructors, and I'm starting to see a lot more training providers and instructors talk to each other about actual joint working opportunities to work in different areas. So we can help to facilitate some of that. So if you've got unmet demand, you've got instructors who've got capacity and you want to desperately keep them by offering them more work, we can help to facilitate some of that as well via that page. And I would definitely encourage you to work with us and work through the regional networks as well to make sure that the instructors are getting as much work as possible. We've got some fantastic instructors who want to work more, and it's great to hear that.
can I just add on the bursary allocation as well, that if you do have any changes, so you don't need as much as you initially required, or you have demand for more, please let us know, because we are taking notes, and so we will be able to look at this towards the end of the year and reallocate any if possible. So please keep us informed of that.
Yeah, and I can also see there's quite a few comments as well about the recognised prior learning route coming in. We'll be making communication shortly on the changes that we're making to the RPL route, which will make it less onerous, and that will be coming out in the next few weeks. I don't have a specific absolute deadline for when that's coming, but we are working as fast and as hard as possible. We recognise this has caused significant stress for some instructors, and we're working on some really positive changes on the recognised prior learning route. And Jessica in the comms team is also planning an instructor recruitment campaign as well, so that we can make sure that our instructors really know how valued they are, and the opportunities for them to get support as well through that campaign. So there's lots that we're doing at a central level to really recognise the great work of all our instructors, who are the lifeblood of everything that we do every single day.
So we should have answered all your questions there, and thank you for your questions about other topics as well. As I say, we're very happy to put some more webinars on around specific topics. When this meeting ends in a moment, you'll be asked for a survey. We'd really appreciate your feedback based on how the session worked for you today, and also on the content and the speakers. And I'd just like to say thank you again to my colleagues at the Trust, and then also Jane and Becky for sharing their insights and their expertise. I found it really useful, so I hope you all have as well. And thank you for all of those thanks that are rolling in on the chat now as well. As I say, the link with the downloads I've put into the chat and is available on our website. We'll also send out an email next week with all of that documents to everybody, regardless of whether they've attended today or not. And we'll also pop some of the questions that came up today in that comms, which hopefully will help everybody. So yeah, that's all we've got from today. So thank you very much for all of your time, and I hope you all have a wonderful Friday.
Good Friday. Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Appreciate everything you do.